HarperCollins presents My Mother the Liar by Troup, read by Jenny Bede. Chapter 1. Rachel's mother had been fond of blanket statements that set others indelibly in their places. Proud of her insights into the characters of others, she had set out her children's traits like a script. As if they were pickles in jars, all three of her daughters had been permanently labelled and preserved by her assertions. Frances was the clever one, Stella was useless, and Rachel was just downright difficult. Did all parents like to define their offspring, leaving their children floundering in typecast? Rachel felt imperfectly moulded by her family, an inconvenient bit-part player in the sometimes drama that had been her life. It had made her bitter. Now her mother was dead. Valerie was no more, and Rachel wasn't feeling much of anything except antipathy. She would have known about Valerie's death weeks before, but she'd quietly ignored the first letter from Frances, knowing that it couldn't contain good news. The Porters didn't trade in good news. The slanting, deeply etched handwriting on the envelope had said enough. Frances could ooze anger even when writing a simple address. She'd used green ink, which Rachel was inclined to think had been distilled from her sister's bile. It had taken a second letter containing the expected diatribe of accusations and sour grapes to make Rachel finally take notice. She had already missed the funeral. Frances had been brutal and unforgiving about that. Rightly so in Rachel's mind. Missing your own mother's funeral was pretty shabby in anyone's book, even if your mother was Valerie Porter. She might not have gone back at all if she hadn't been required to assist with the application for probate. Without that, she'd have carried on burying her head in the sand and ignored them all forever. It was Valerie Porter's final revenge to force her to go back. When she was sitting on the train, when it was too late to turn back and take refuge again, she allowed herself to think about the consequences of going back, of what she'd have to face, who she'd have to face. There were people more dreadful than Frances who populated the past. While the train took her relentlessly towards home, she pulled out the second letter and reread Frances's words. I am patently aware that you still harbour resentment about the past. However, the house is a joint responsibility, and whatever grudges you still bear, I feel you should put them aside for once and show a little loyalty, Frances' letter baldly stated. Stella is nowhere to be found, and I've been left to deal with this alone. You have a legal obligation to carry out Mother's last wishes at least. I will expect to see you at the soonest opportunity. I shan't say at your convenience, because that would mean waiting forever. Rachel could imagine the gritted teeth and grim expression that had fueled those words. It had been a sense of stale guilt and obligation that got her to Paddington Station, plus curiosity and a strange, unpleasant yearning for something she couldn't define, which had made her get on the train. Since when had Frances ever needed anything from her? With every mile that took her closer to home, she felt an increasing sense of apprehension. Given the circumstance of her departure all those years ago, it was bizarre that Frances would contact her at all, let alone request her help. They both knew that there was no love lost between Valerie and Rachel. They hadn't spoken in years. The only logical conclusion she could draw was that her physical presence was needed to allow the sale of the house, because no connection between sisters, or mothers for that matter, would have driven Frances to write otherwise. Given that for most of Rachel's life Frances hadn't been able to bear being in the same room as her for more than a few minutes, there couldn't be any other reason. Frances wanted the money. Nothing else on earth would have forced her to make contact, not even the truth. That was something none of them could bring themselves to face. By the time Rachel arrived at the house, Frances had already sold everything of any remote value that Valerie hadn't, and had resorted to burning what was left on a large bonfire in the overgrown garden. Things that couldn't be burnt, like the ancient enamelled cooker that their grandmother had bought in 1959, and the 6 broken vacuum cleaners that had languished in the attic for years along with numerous other aged and dishevelled domestic items, were to be taken to the local tip by Sid, the man with a van, and his monosyllabic sidekick, Steve. Sid and Steve were cheap, available, and discreet. Frances valued discretion and economy above most things, including false sentiment. She showed none of that when greeting her sister, merely offered her a pair of rubber gloves and a black bag, and told her to pick a room, any room, and get on with it. Rachel received a warm welcome from Sid. The amiable Sid explained that he and Steve had been at the house for days, repeatedly loading the van and making trips to the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?